you.
All right, well, welcome everybody to Thine Own Self Be True Hamlet panel. Welcome to you here tonight in the room, and also those of you joining us online. My name's James Evans. I'm the Associate Director of Bell Shakespeare, and I'd like to introduce the panel in just a minute. But first of all, let me tell you what we're doing here. This panel is the fourth in a series that the State Library is calling the Comedies, Histories and Tragedies series, presented by the State Library of New South Wales in association with Bell Shakespeare. Each event and conversation focuses on one particular play. We've done Richard III. Joe, our Head of Education, has been running these panels before me. The Scottish play, Romeo and Juliet, and tonight is Hamlet. And later on we've got coming up, don't forget, Midsummer Night's Dream and Julius Caesar as well, to round out the series. Now, this is all part of the 400th anniversary of the publication of Shakespeare's first folio. And of course, here in this building lives Australia's only version of that incredible document. And it's only one of three in the entire Southern Hemisphere. There's one in Auckland, Peter, at the Auckland City Library, and there's another one in Cape Town at the National Library of South Africa as well. And you can see our first folio, that is your first folio, the taxpayers of New South Wales, you own that, it's right here, as part of the State Library's exhibition, which is going all the way until February 2024, called For All Time, Shakespeare in Print. Now, the first folio was compiled by Shakespeare's friends, particularly Hemmings and Condell, two actors from Shakespeare's company, about 7 years after he died. And if they hadn't done that, we might not have up to 18 of Shakespeare's plays in existence today, including extraordinary plays like Julius Caesar, As You Like It, The Tempest. The Scottish play might not exist at all if it wasn't for this document. So we're very thankful to them, thankful to have these plays. Let's meet our panel here tonight. Now, the worst thing about being on a panel is when you sit there and the host runs through your entire CV and tells them every single play you've done. So I'm not going to do that. Let's take that as read. It's on the website. If you want to know what these people have done, go read it. Let me just give you a one-line intro. Peter Evans, Artistic Director of Bell Shakespeare. Lucy Bell, actor. Toby Schmitz, actor, director and writer. And R.A. Spratt, author and podcast host. Now, let me tell you also their involvement with Hamlet recently. So Peter first directed Hamlet back in 2006 with Gareth Reeves, who recently played Harry Potter in Melbourne, in Christchurch. And then, of course, the long-delayed Bell Shakespeare production in 2021 and finally 2022, starring Harriet Gordon Anderson. Lucy, born in Stratford, just like Shakespeare, steeped in Shakespeare from a young age, and recently played Gertrude in Peter's production of Hamlet. Toby has played Hamlet twice, once in La Boite under the direction of David Berthold, and then again at Belvoir with Simon Stone. And Rachel Spratt, of course, has written this awesome book, which if you have any young people in your life, Hamlet is Not Okay. This is such a great book, delving into the play for young people, for teenagers particularly. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Now, Peter, one of the things we hear about Hamlet is that the famous joke is two people came out of watching Hamlet and said, "Gee, that was a great play." The other one said, "Yeah, except for all the cliches." And the title of this discussion itself, "To Thine Own Self Be True." Who says that in the play, by the way? Thank you very much. Good. Peter, how do you direct a play that is just full of lines that people are kind of singing along to in the audience?
I'll answer it by another joke, which is, how do you eat an elephant? It's just one bite at a time. And in the end, that's the way we do it. We go one line at a time, and we work out what we're saying, and we work out why we're saying it, and we don't worry about how famous it is, because the lines actually all make sense. They're all said for a reason, and so we have to work out that reason. And in fact, you do in rehearsals forget about that a bit. I suspect it's harder for the actor performing it, may be harder and have, but certainly in the rehearsal room, we get beyond that pretty quickly, I think.
I just remember Jeremy Campese, who had the unenviable task of saying something is rotten in the state of Denmark, and he tried to say it under his breath as he was exiting, because every time he would say it, the audience would be like, oh,
That's a particularly tough line, though, I think.
It is.
As an exit line, I think that one's particularly tough, and I think there was quite a lot of discussion about whether we could get away with cutting it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And we figured you got to have it.
Yeah.
We just had to have it. So he had to suffer through it.
That's right. Lucy, what do you reckon? How do you approach a play that's so famous as an actor?
I agree with Peter that you have to. I was telling Peter, I heard recently somebody say that Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet are two plays that no one sees for the first time, that we've all got such an awareness of them, and that I guess that Peter's absolutely right, that you have to put out of your head everyone that's come before and just approach it line by line and make sense of things. And it's extraordinary in rehearsal that you can read it, you can learn it, you can study it, all of that. But when you get up on the floor and you're in relationship to the other characters, suddenly all of these things drop in that you don't get when you read it. A small example is I was playing Gertrude, and she has the speech about Ophelia's death, and I was thinking, why this beautiful speech about someone drowning? And you ask yourselves all the questions of, was she there, and did she witness the drowning, and then you get up to do it and you realise that she actually has a line before that which is telling Laertes that his sister has just drowned. And when you get up and you look at this young man who's just lost his father, and you have to tell him that his last living relative, who he loved with all his heart, has just drowned, suddenly the speech makes a lot more sense, or you find a sort of particular way into it. So I think you can have an awareness. I think it's wonderful to have an awareness of the history of the play and all that's come before it. But when you're actually getting up and doing it, you have to, as Peter says, just make sense of it for yourself with your company of actors, line by line by line.
Toby,
and it's always new. No, it's always new, isn't it, as well? Each performance, each audience, in the doing of it, Lucy's right. In the doing of it, you suddenly are not thinking about it being famous, because the stakes are always wonderfully high, and it's a unique experience, and no one has ever said this line before on this night to this particular Ophelia or Laertes or whoever. So it's when the audience starts chiming along and doing the lines with you, that's when it's a little harder to forget that these lines are actually embedded in our DNA somehow. I had twice, two productions, once in Brisbane and once in Sydney, that I was told to slow down by an audience member. And it was both times it was during To Be or Not to Be, and I think I was instinctively trying to go fast, same as sort of whisper a line as you go off, so people wouldn't in tone along with me. Yeah.
You're going to outrun them.
Yeah, that's right. And once when it happened, the guy said, "Go slower." And so I started going really slow through To Be or Not to Be. And then I was going, what am I doing? Taking direction from the grumpy guy up the back. This is crazy.
I find it quite disconcerting when people bring their scripts
that
to
happens.
the theatre.
That happens.
It happens. So you're very... And we were just talking about no version of Hamlet is the same. There are edits, So, I think they find it tricky to keep along, or they might think that we're just stuffing the whole thing up. But, that's weird.
And Rachel, you're exploring Hamlet through the eyes of a teenager, and particularly a teenager who doesn't like to read. Her parents run a bookshop. By the way, like Toby's mum has the best second-hand bookshop in Sydney, Elizabeth's in Newtown. Make sure you get there.
Thank you.
But Selby, your character's parents run a bookshop. She's not particularly into reading, and then not too many spoilers, but I'm sure you won't mind if I tell everyone. Okay, she falls into the world of Hamlet. Yeah. I love this because suddenly it's kind of like Sleep No More. You know that thing in New York where you go and suddenly you're in a scene in the Scottish play, and then you walk into another room. Yeah, it's like immersive. Like you feel like you're immersed in the play, and so the instead of her reading it in a book, suddenly she's immersed in it. Why is that important, do you think, for young people to understand?
I wanted them to. I think when you go and see Shakespeare as a young person, in the avalanche of words, you know how, maybe not you because you're so sophisticated, but you go to see a Shakespeare play and there's like that first 3 minutes where your brain is adjusting and you don't really understand the words yet, and then your brain's like, oh yeah, okay, and you tune in and then you understand more and more and more as you go along. I didn't want the kids to get lost in that, and I didn't want them to miss key things. So there was just some key things I wanted to establish in that first scene. It's like they're really cold on top of the castle, and just like get that sense of they feel cold and they're shivering, and then the sense that they're frightened, because I think you can see it and have that avalanche of words of the people guarding the top of the castle and just miss those really simple fundamental emotions that then set up the scene. So just spell it out for them. Just say Selby's lying on the ground, she feels cold, and she just feels frightened, so
Dread,
frightened.
yeah.
And then that sets up the whole thing, and it makes it easier for young people to then, when the words start, get where it's coming from.
And then a lot of what you do is you travel around to schools, you meet with thousands of kids.
Yes, literally thousands and
Yeah,
thousands.
absolutely. And what has their response been to your book and to Hamlet?
It's
Shakespeare?
really interesting because you were saying how like people know the play inside out. Kids just don't. It's amazing what kids don't know, because it's not like when we were kids and you'd have midday movies and everyone watched the same thing, and you know, like even if you didn't like something, it was all that was on because it was just sport on all the other channels, so you'd watch it. Kids just, they watch what they like on YouTube and that's it, and they just don't know stuff. But they're fascinated by Shakespeare and they know they should know about it. So it's really interesting. I was out at Mossy Public School, which was not, like, socioeconomically, they struggle a bit there. But the kids were just curious, and they got me to read some of my book about, because I let them vote on what I read to them, so they can choose any of my titles. But it's amazing how often they'll choose that book because they're like, I've heard about this Hamlet, dude, tell me more. And it's really good fun. And the thing is, the language, they don't understand the words. Like even me talking, because I talk so fast and I bust out all the multisyllabic words, they get confused by me normally. But when you start doing the Shakespeare stuff and you start to talk like, you know, you went to RADA or something, they love it. They just get so sucked in and they're hanging on your every word like it's the best ghost story they've ever heard. It's really good fun.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love the way, just the cheeky and naughty way that you play with the characters. I love that Ophelia. I am going to drop a big spoiler here.
Yeah, just drop it. It's a huge spoiler. They're never going to read it.
Ophelia ends up in Pride and Prejudice as one of the sisters. I think that's fantastic. I love it. So we get to go and explore that world as well.
Yeah.
But Peter, Bell Shakespeare obviously is deeply involved in education, has been since the very beginning. John Bell's vision for the company was Shakespeare is not just for the inner city, but it's for everyone and for young people as well. And we continue that to this day. But it's really, really hard. So why is it important still to Bell to do that?
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, a lot of the work is about demystifying it and making it as easy as possible. And Joanna's work and the plays that we take in are about opening the plays up. But James is right; it is hard, but the rewards for that are enormous. And so, in a way, the plays become a Trojan horse for language, poetry, and the imagination. And those things are so incredibly fundamental, is that if we can get them in and exploring language and having some fun with that, then we obviously think that the rewards are enormous. So that's the kind of technical bit, and then there's obviously just the story bit, and the stories, of course, have so many moral questions within them that no matter what age you are, you're confronting, and so we obviously tailor that to particular things that maybe young people are going through. Again, it's kind of a Trojan horse to actually confront a whole bunch of issues, but do it in a way that is poetic and involves the imagination.
I think, go on, Tony.
That's thinking about Hamlet, to carry on with the young adult book and stuff, is that I remember it just came to me then talking to Lucy's dad, John Bell, years ago, and him saying kids dig Hamlet. Like there's something about this particular one that the young generation loves, and there's something punky about it, And it's often also productions of Hamlet where an older generation can poo-poo the production and go, that's not how I want Hamlet to be done. But the kids and the matinees and the younger people, even in their 20s, sort of the youth, they really react to Hamlet in some way, and maybe it's obvious the reasons why, but he's a great one for getting the kids in. Yeah. He's a great entry into the whole deal.
But also, there's a focus on soliloquy in this play, almost unlike any other Shakespeare play, except Richard III maybe, where Hamlet connects so directly with the audience and just pours his heart out to them. What have you got? You've got Too solid flesh, rogue and peasant slave, to be or not to be, and then if you keep it in how all occasions, or usually you cut it. Is it true, Toby, that in one performance someone's phone went off during To Be or Not to Be, and you did something?
It was actually during Rogue and Peasant Slave, unfortunately, because it's an angrier. I was already in a bit of an angry spot.
What happened?
But it was right in the middle, and he was sitting kind of there, smack in the good seats, and he was right in front of me, a chap, and his phone was going off in his pocket. Now, not the full ring, but the big buzz with it glowing, and people around him could tell, and I could hear it. And he kind of just kept grinning, and he wouldn't turn it off, and I was in the middle of the soliloquy. And so I waded into the audience and I grabbed it out of his... No, I said, give me your phone. I didn't say it, I just went like that. And he handed the phone over, grinning, which I always thought was quite interesting. He was like, wow, I'm in the show. It gave me his phone, and I threw it at the wall, nearly missing another poor actor's head, and smashed into a million bits. And then I felt instantly terrible. And totally shattered some sort of literally fourth wall. And then I was very angry at him for my coward and something too much spittle. And then after the show, I was just feeling awful. The stage manager, I couldn't even go down in the 4-hour, I need to just go home. But the stage manager brought this guy his bits of phone and said, I'm so sorry. And this guy, apparently a huge grin on his face, I loved it. He said, does that happen every night? I still don't really understand the question.
That's so good. I love that. Lucy, when you're on stage, I know you've never done anything like that before, but every night the audience is different. 8 shows a week. They are completely, a Thursday night audience is different from a Friday, from a Saturday. We just did Romeo and Juliet, and we couldn't believe how different the audiences were from night to night. How do you handle that as an actor who has such an intimate bond with the audience?
Sorry, how do you handle the audiences being different? It's always really interesting because, as Toby was saying, it's always new. It's the same play, but every performance is different, and it's always a bit kind of it's always exciting. There's always anticipation about what the audience will be like, and it's strange that we do. Kind of put everybody together as one collective being, it becomes the audience, even though you're made up of all these individuals, but the collective audience has a kind of a personality. So people will say, what do they like? And you'll say, oh, they're friendly, or they're warm, or they're fidgety. They're
listening. They're listening tonight. Yeah,
they're listening. If they're quiet, if they're not laughing at the jokes, they're listening. Sorry, I'm not answering the question well at all. So it's interesting for us to, it absolutely keeps it fresh because the audience is cliche, but they're the other character in the performance. So the audience really does kind of inform and change the performance each night.
Yeah, it can be completely different.
And they were built to be rigorous audience participation things originally. There was a lot more back and forth when they were first on. So if something does happen weird, or some school kids want to jeer, or I don't know, someone's phone goes off, the plays have great rigour and are flexible, and they can get a few laughs out of it or whatever.
We had a very weird one in Melbourne. Am I allowed to say? It's a rude word.
No, go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry, it's not Hamlet. It's Romeo and Juliet. But just recently. I was playing the nurse, and I was saying to Juliet, when I'm saying you should really marry Paris, forget about Romeo. And I said to Juliet, oh, he's a lovely gentleman, And someone in the audience shouted out, "No, he's not. He's a wanker." Like this, not a pause, just straight in, and I just kept carrying on. But he was listening. He was
Poor old
involved.
Paris. Poor old Paris. Hey, Rachel, in the book you also delve a little bit into psychology. I mean, one of the interesting things is that Selby is almost like a shoulder to cry on for Hamlet. You know, Hamlet is not okay. You know, it's almost like Selby becomes a therapist for Hamlet, listening to him. Of course, as you mentioned in the book, Shakespeare didn't have the words of kind of Freudian psychology or whatever, but Selby layers that over the top to try and understand Hamlet's depression. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. And why was that important?
Well, I'm a comedy writer by training, so I don't know if you know about comedy writers. As a community, we tend to have a lot of mental health problems, so it's a very personal issue for me. Like a lot of writers will like crowbar in their personal political views, and I've always tried not to do that, but I always have, because I know so many people and I have so many family members with mental health issues. I've always tried to be super sensitive about the way you depict that, and to depict that in a positive way. And also I was very conscious of this because when you have a younger audience, you have a big responsibility to their safety, that if I was going to talk about Hamlet, who considers suicide, and Ophelia, who I would argue, did she commit suicide or not? That's a whole other argument. But still, there's a conversation about suicide there, so I was very conscious of talking about that without putting wrong ideas or dangerous ideas in people's heads. So I did my research with what you should say and how you should say that, and how to help kids, give them just a couple of tools, like a bit beyond just "are you okay" stuff that people learn about what to do if you have a friend who is struggling, and how you can just help them through that hour until you can get better help. So I tried to reflect that sort of thing. So that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, and I love the way Selby just sits with Ophelia. Just for 10 minutes, just say, let's just get through the next 10 minutes and then just get through the next hour, and then it's going to be okay. Yeah.
And not having empty platitudes, just saying, I know you feel horrible, and nothing's going to change that short term, but eventually you'll get there, and let's just get through the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter, this play obviously appeared in the first folio, but appeared in other versions in Shakespeare's lifetime as well. There was a quarto, which is just like a little paperback version that's hawked on the streets during Shakespeare's lifetime. One that seems to be pretty good, in pretty good nick, and another one that's a bit more dodgy. Why are there these three different versions of Hamlet, and what can you as a director draw from them to put on a production?
Well, look. There's literally millions of words written about the different versions and different theories on what that may mean. So the first quarto, we don't know what it is. Some people think it's been constructed by memory from one of the smaller characters, and not only by memory, but of a particular cut of the script that might have been a touring production. So not only are the lines not exactly like we know Hamlet, but the scenes are slightly different, and it's only about 2 hours long. It's a little over half as long as the folio edition. Now, the reason people think it's a memorial reconstruction is because Marcellus's lines are all exactly right. And the lines, the last lines of the scene where Marcellus would be in the wings are right, but everything else is a bit of a mess. Now, of course, copyright. The companies didn't own the copyright. There wasn't any such thing, and so being able to come up with something that you could sell and pretend was what people were going to watch or what they may have seen was worth a lot of money. And so when what we know as Quarto 2 came out, the title page says, "This is the true copy," which is clearly speaking to the other kind of pirated one. Now, whether that's true, like there's another theory that maybe it was a very early draft, that it was. We don't have a printing of it until about 1603. 1603, that's right. But maybe this is the Hamlet, like that we've heard that we know there was a version of Hamlet around in about 1590. So maybe it could even be an early draft by Shakespeare, and that we're seeing. But I've read enough about it to realise that we can't really tell. All of the theories are super interesting. Then the second quarto has about 300 lines that the folio doesn't have, and the folio has 80 lines that the second quarto doesn't have, including some famous stuff. So Denmark's a prison. I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space. That little scene, which also has "there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." That's in the quarto and not in the folio. Now, did Shakespeare edit that? Is that cut, or has it come out of the prompt copy and just been eliminated in terms of gathering together the pages? Again, we don't know. There's lots of theories about whether what we're seeing is editing. Clearly, this play was edited. When they went on tour, it would not have been the whole thing. A number of the plays we can see would have been cut up and down, and I don't think that they're as sacred as sometimes we see them as. They would have been much more, as we do in the theatre, much more responding to whether it was a touring, who we were playing to, etc., etc. But it's endlessly fascinating, because aside from those scenes and lines, there's words that are different. So in the second quarto, it's to sallied flesh would melt. And then in the folio, it's solid flesh would melt. And you can spend a lot of time trying to decide which one's which. And in fact, somewhere in the 18th century, they changed it to sullied, which they thought was closer to sallied, and that maybe it was a typo. Anyway, it's endlessly fascinating.
People get into fist fights about this stuff. Yeah.
But Toby, as Peter was mentioning, during Shakespeare's time, obviously the plays were edited. It's not. No one put on the 4.5-hour Hamlet. Not even Shakespeare did. Is it okay to mess with Shakespeare?
It is, and they're rigorous things. And I think playing to your audience, at the end of the day, they were commercial ventures. They weren't being that sacred about it. There was also bear fights, at interval, and juggling, and working girls in the crowd, and orange throwing, and all of that stuff. And they had to be rigorous and adaptable. And because they were, and because Hamlet was such a hit early on, was a crowd favourite, that we can really chart our history and how society has changed by what they did cut out of productions. For a period, Hamlet in his first soliloquies, talking about his mother's enseamed bed, was just a little too much for certain audiences. But then it comes back into vogue, and you really chart our very own history, social, economic, political, through what was cut out and what was put back in, or what words were emphasised. When people start actually taking theatre criticism seriously enough to actually start talking about what words certain actors hit, now you get into real sort of nerd territory. But it starts to teach you about what theatre was like in that day, how people treated metre and rhyme, and how much you could handle Hamlet kissing Ophelia's hand. Now that's sort of de rigueur. The nunnery scene is hard. He says horrible things, yet we also truly believe he loves her somehow. And now it's very hard not to see a nunnery scene where Hamlet doesn't at least indicate to her at some point physically that I'm really sorry, I love you, but you gotta go, before he says the mean stuff about the nunnery. But there was hundreds of years where just touching her would have caused a riot.
So, well, then, Lucy, let's talk about the female characters in Hamlet, because one of the things, and Rachel, I'm going to ask you in a sec as well, because you deal with the misogyny in Hamlet in your book too, and Selby's just not having a bar of it. But have you experienced that playing Gertrude, you're kind of always fighting against this kind of misogynist machine that is trying to keep you down, keep that character squashed?
It's as Gertrude, she has this buffer of being the queen. She has a sense of some kind of power because she's married to Claudius. But I think the character that really suffers is Ophelia. It was almost too painful to follow her journey. That she has absolutely no power, and that the kind of support that she has in the play from her father, from her brother, from Hamlet, it's all taken away. I found the scene where she comes to Claudius and Gertrude and she's lost her mind and she's reaching for something and they give her nothing and she disappears from the play. It's almost unbearable. She's just so alone and powerless. It's terrible. I think with Gertrude, she has a sense of having some kind of status, but when she realises that Claudius isn't who she thought he was, at least in the way that I approached it, she actually doesn't have any power at all either. So yeah, it is. It's a cruel world for the women of the play.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rachel, how have your readers dealt with, because you smash those two worlds up against each other, and Ophelia's powerlessness is very stark in your book, and Selby's kind of shock at the way that world operates as well. How have your readers responded to that?
People haven't really talked. I talk to kids. they don't even really think about misogyny in the same way that we would. So, yeah, it's kind of weird. As a writer, like when I was reading the play over and over and listening to it over and over, like just as someone, because I'd write a lot of TV, Ophelia's scenes to me, I look at it and I think Shakespeare, he didn't focus enough on her. I think almost his greatest act of misogyny is he didn't write her part very well, because I think she's inconsistent in the way she acts, the way she thinks. It's very hard to see how she's thinking because she changes so much from scene to scene. I think he had so much issues inside him. Like a lot of stuff in Hamlet is him pouring out these dark ideas that are inside Shakespeare's head. He obviously had a very troubled relationship with his wife and then all these strange relationships with other women and men and whatever. And I think sometimes he's just like, okay, and now I'm going to put my 5-minute comedy bit about how dreadful women are for painting on their faces. And it's almost got nothing to do with who Ophelia is and what her journey is. It's just like, oh, I've got some really cool things to say about how makeup is deceptive. So I think that's almost his greatest act of misogyny, is the way he didn't write her as well as he could have.
That's interesting. But Peter, one of the ways that you can... Sorry, were you going to say something, Lucy? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to stand up for Shakespeare insofar as Hamlet is behaving in a way that he wouldn't necessarily normally behave, but he has invested so much emotionally in his mother, understandably, and in his girlfriend, and when they, as he sees it, betrays them or disappoints him or abandons him, lets him down, then, I mean, it's horrible how close to the surface the misogyny is and the things he says about them are. But I don't know that it's necessarily as a...
But I don't think it's black and white. Like, Shakespeare was obviously the most empathetic, wonderful guy who had this amazing ability to understand the way people tick. But that's the confusing thing about people, isn't it? It's not black and white. But he did have issues. He obviously... But, like, you look at how he did Cleopatra or, Rosalind. He has these amazing three-dimensional women characters. I just don't think... or maybe that's what he's trying to do with Ophelia. Maybe he's saying he's saying these young women are two-dimensional. So I don't know.
This particular play is him having a go at a new genre, like the movie Seven or something, where horrible things happen in this medieval Danish castle, and misogyny is here, and this is going to be a horrible tragedy. This particular one, it's going to be a haunting, grief-filled spook fest.
Yeah, I was just thinking as a writer, because it's such a long play and her scenes are quite a long... He would get to this scene and he'd forget what he'd written in the previous one. That's just the way I write. And then you think, oh, yeah. Sure. And then your editor says, what are you doing? And I just think he probably didn't have as mean an editor as I did.
Sure.
That's right.
Or that thing we were saying about if you have no agency and you're being manipulated and pushed into behaving in ways that you may not choose to with Ophelia, then your behaviour is inconsistent. I mean, I think humans are inconsistent anyway.
It's
but-
kind of hard to imagine how it would be for a woman in that position to be so powerless.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
almost, like when I saw your production with Harriet in the lead, I almost find it more confronting the scene with Laertes at the beginning where he's telling her what to do. I know I've got an older brother. If he told me what to do like that, I'd punch him in the face. And she's all like, of course, and like she teases him a bit, but you think, this is so weird that these men, like her dad just ordering around, like get rid of the letters and stuff. You think that, like my dad, again, if he tried to do that to me, I'd tell him where to go too. So yeah, it is weird to think of someone being that powerless. It's probably impossible for us to imagine today what it would be like to be a woman in society
I think
then.
when Hamlet says at the beginning in his first soliloquy, "Frailty, thy name is woman," and has a real go at the whole gender just because his mum is remarried. And, and I think you can feel the audience, and I reckon they would have done it in the original production, going, that's a little far, mate. And it's set up that there's something not quite right with Hamlet. He's not okay. You can't just write off a whole gender because your mum did that. And it's there at the beginning that, as a heads up to the audience, like, this has got some horrible moments in it, guys. This is going to be one of those stories.
It's teen angst.
It's
there's a
it's
bit of that
too.
teen
Yeah.
angst, yeah.
But one of the ways, Peter, that you can deal with these interpretations is through putting the character up on stage. Now, traditionally, the scene with Ophelia is quote unquote a mad scene, and you see her in some state of dishevelment of undress. You decided not to do it like that. You had a very different idea about that scene. What was that?
Oh yeah, so obviously in Shakespeare's day it would have been a young boy, but also madness. The theatre itself, it was much more symbolic, and so there were kind of signifiers. And so madness was, if you were female, your hair was out. Like to have your hair out, you're clearly in some kind of distress. And if you weren't properly dressed, then you must have let yourself go. So there was signifiers. And then by the time we get to the Restoration and women can be on the stage, a lot of these mad scenes were ways in which to get actresses undressed. And there's a long history of displaying nakedness and distress in female characters for the titillation of the audience. And Restoration comedies are full of these. And so we wanted to not have any of that. And so we didn't change Ophelia at all. She looked exactly the same. And so there was no physical thing to show us that she was in distress. And we just did it through, actually, the other actors told us when they looked in her eyes that something was wrong, and then we did it through the songs. And through the songs, she's trying to communicate. And so we found what I think was a much more interesting way of dealing with her distress. Now, when it comes to madness, this is again a thing in Shakespeare you're referring to. We don't have the psychology, and my particular interest is not trying to psychoanalyze the characters, because often their distress is a distress of categories, that it's actually a kind of identity split, that the characters get broken in the way that they see themselves or the way they fit in the world. And Ophelia's is the most graphic example of exactly the same problem that Hamlet has, which is grief. That I think the play is actually about grief, that is the theme and overriding thing that the play's about, but none of the characters are allowed to grieve, and that all of Shakespeare's plays are about customs, and this play actually talks about customs all the time, but right from the top he's not allowed to grieve. He's told that he needs to get over it and to move on, and Ophelia's told the same thing, and their grief drives them mad. And it's a recurring thing that comes through and through the play. Laertes is the one character who acts out his grief, and his turns to rage. And I think it is. I think Shakespeare is deeply meditating on what happens when you don't have the processes to deal with grief.
I love that. Their grief drives them mad. And Toby, one of the enduring moments I remember from your most recent performance of Hamlet is when you see in the closet scene with Gertrude, you see the ghost of your father, she doesn't, and you had this heartbreaking moment where you asked, "Do you see nothing there?" And it was a genuine shock for Hamlet that I'm losing my mind for real.
Yes,
do
that's
you
right.
think that's what's happening?
Yes, that's right. It was always a skin tingling moment to play, to turn around and see my father, then to realise my mum can't see him, because there the grief and the madness come right together and collide, and it's great. I can tear up in the moment thinking about that. So lasting is that moment in that particular play.
Because that's the frightening thing, is the realization that you might be mad.
Yeah.
That it's not the madness of that Constance wishes for in King John, where she goes, if I was mad, it would be much better because I wouldn't feel this grief. This is a madness where it's just like maybe I have lost.
That's
Maybe I've
right.
lost my mind.
I think quite concretely in that moment he goes, oh no, I'm not well, I'm not okay, and he's right there with his mum, and it's been rather awful to his mother just then as well, and there's something very childish in that moment. He's stripped right back to going, I'm not well, Mum, and I think it might be too late. Yeah.
So is Hamlet the hero of this story? Because as far as I can count, he's responsible for the deaths of Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, Polonius, Claudius, Laertes, at minimum. Not Ophelia, maybe Gertrude a little bit. Is I don't know. What do you think? Is he the hero of the story, or is he a villain?
It depends. We can say hero in a kind of literary way as being the lead and the protagonist in the story. My particular take on tragedy is actually Hegel's take, which is a proper tragedy, is the battle between two goods. That a play that's about the battle between good and evil is actually more likely to be a melodrama. Whereas when you get a battle between two goods, then you're in something properly tragic. And I think that's the key to Hamlet. I'm going to try and keep this short because I could rant about this for hours. The key to Hamlet is that it's actually a classical tragedy. That tragedy for the Greeks and Romans is inside a pagan world where revenge is a virtue. That if someone kills your father, then your duty is to revenge, and that's a virtue. And in all the Greeks and Romans plays, that brings some kind of solace. And the genius of Shakespeare is he takes a pagan story and he hands it to a Christian. And inside a Christian, it's now a sin. And the whole engine of the play, and this is why I rail against the idea that the play is about someone who can't make up their mind, which is actually something that Olivier stuck in the culture, because he has a voiceover that says there's a play about someone who can't make. It's not. It's someone dealing with an essential question about whether it is right to revenge. But sadly, if he had just revenged, one person would have died. But through struggling between these two goods or these two bads, 7 people die, which is what makes it an interesting play, I think.
And just straight up good dramaturgy, just good storytelling.
No question. So, Lucy, why, as we come towards the end of this conversation, why does Hamlet endure?
I think because it's so human, you know, that the things that he's struggling with, grief being chief amongst them, is something that we so connect with. And the fear he has of losing his mind, that the grief is going to be overwhelming, it's very, I think everybody can understand that. And that a lot of the characters in the play, I think it's Gertrude is avoiding grief by getting married so quickly. That was my take. But what he deals with and how directly he deals with the audience, wrestling with the questions of what it is to be human, what it is to be a good human, all of those things are so they're so easy for an audience to connect with. And he deals with the complexity of being human in the most beautiful way. The language is extraordinary. So he makes a kind of, as Toby was saying, dark and terrible ideas and thoughts and scary, confronting thoughts, incredibly watchable. And you every production of Hamlet that I've seen, I remember the Hamlet so clearly. I often forget about other parts of the production, but the connection that you make as an audience with that person who can't talk to anybody else, he can't share his feelings with anybody else on stage, so he connects with us as the audience. That's a really special thing, and it's the genius of the play, I think.
Yeah. Rachel, why does Hamlet endure?
Well, the language, this beautiful, beautiful language, he so perfectly expresses these ideas, and just time and time again, they just tumble out these brilliant ideas that so you can read and listen and watch it over and over again and just constantly find new things. But also it's just like the classic universal story. Like you think all these hundreds of years later, there's all these things that are so true today for young people today. It's like my dad is trying to force me to do something I don't want to do. Like have these feelings and I don't know how to feel about like these dangerous feelings. It's all stuff teenagers and young people today, it's all stuff they feel, and it's been expressed to them in a way, this beautiful old language that makes them think about it in a different way. So it's just classic universal storytelling.
Yeah. Toby, what do you reckon?
I think all those reasons for its longevity. I think, in particular in this one, those ideas are wrapped up in what Hamlet himself calls mighty opposites. So you're always getting two bangs for your buck. He's going through stuff that we all feel, human loss, but he's also a Danish medieval prince, which we will never be. So you're getting a bit of sort of escapism, plus he feels like there's always two kind of things going on, which creates a dynamo. And right at its very core, all these ideas together, I think it's about its danger. I think that's why it lasts and why it's arguably the most popular or done, is that it's a bit naughty. It comes close to some very tough things to talk about. It's kind of got a bit of punk to it. We know he's probably going to go mad at some point. We know there's going to be a body count. And we go, oh yeah, I'm up for that. I mean, there's always time and place for happy endings, but we get on board time and time again for tragedies, for scary movies, for the darker stories, so we can play them out and that we don't have to have them in our lives. We can exorcise them. And I think it's a dangerous play and bit sexy.
Kids love the violent bits.
Yeah, for sure. Peter, you've been living with this play I don't think you can remember a time when you weren't aware of this play. Why does it endure for you?
Oh, well, look, there's a fantastic point. I agree with everything. I don't think it should go without being noted. It is a deeply strange play. It is a very unusual play. When you make it, you're struck. I mean, Rachel's kind of tapping into it a bit. Dramaturgically, it is very weird. The characters often are quite contradictory. The structure of it is odd. People seem to forget things. The Ophelia thing, I just want to talk about that just for a second, is that there's an incredible moment that would never happen in modern dramaturgy, and it would never happen in film dramaturgy anymore, is that the audience forgets that Polonius is Ophelia and Laertes' father. They just forget. And when he's killed in the closet and Hamlet goes on these hilarious riffs about where he stowed the body, and the audience is completely with Hamlet for about 15 minutes. We're with Hamlet and we don't care about Polonius. And we did everything in our production to make him a good father. We really made him and that family unit. But the audience forget, and somehow, and it happens throughout the plays, Shakespeare knows that the audience will forget. And then when she appears, when Hamlet's sent off to England and Gertrude's there and Horatio, and she says, I will not see her. And Horatio says, you have to see her. And the audience, and I don't know whether sometimes it's subconscious, gets filled with guilt because they've relished Hamlet killing Polonius, and then the realization that this young woman whose brother is in Paris, his father has died, and we now go through it. And I think that's entirely to the detriment of her arc, but completely consciously done by Shakespeare. So then it absolutely smacks us in the head. And then he does it again with Laertes and Laertes' rage, and then Gertrude comes in and we find out that she's dead. Like it's an astonishing kind of thing that when you take it apart with film logic, with dramaturgy, is a mess. But in performance is absolutely amazing, the way Shakespeare knows where an audience's point of view and attention is at any point. The first time you run it is an amazing experience in the rehearsal room, because all you're seeing are problems, and then you put it together and it just works. I would argue, a bit like pizza, even with bad production of Hamlet, it still works. It's a fascinating machine, I think. I think it's amazing.
I love that. And I also love the idea that Shakespeare's characters, especially Hamlet, are not like a contemporary dramatic character which has a smooth arc from beginning to end. They're more like a cube where you show this side, then you show that side, then you show this side, then you show this side. And then the character is the accumulation of all of those sides rather than a nice sphere.
I think that's right, because as an audience, as human beings, we're narrative machines, and we cannot bear someone to be inconsistent. It's why we're no good at understanding when people lie to us. And so we turn that into an arc. The actor only needs to present sides, and our brains will not let that person be inconsistent. And I think Shakespeare knows that too. And so the audience fills them in, and so they become even more real through their contradictions and their inconsistencies.
I just want to thank this amazing panel. What a great discussion. R.A. Spratt, Toby Schmitz, Lucy Bell, Peter Evans, thank you so much. That was amazing. Now, we do have time for some questions. We've got about 15 minutes for a couple of questions from the audience. We've got a roving mic there. Lydia, you've got the microphone, so just wait till you get the mic so that our friends online can hear your question as well. Thank you.
Can I just ask Rachel how the young people respond to Polonius' advice to his son?
I don't do that bit when I do schools. Okay. I just do the bit that's up on top of the castle. Because I do a reading. I do like a 15 to 20 minute reading. They love the ghost stuff, and they love all, the booming voice and, leprous distillment and all that sort of stuff. They just eat that up with a spoon. I try to avoid the Polonius thing because it's full of the cliches, and I've always thought it's really ironic that everyone quotes Polonius. And Polonius is a fool. Like Shakespeare's using it ironically. Like this presentation is to thy own self be true. And it's like, Shakespeare's laughing at Polonius when he has him saying these things. So, but I don't want to get into those levels talking to children. And I am really bad at stopping talking. So if I did that bit with kids, I would do like a whole hour about how Polonius is very silly. So yeah, I don't get into that.
Yeah, although it's not bad advice, is it? Yeah. What do you think of Polonius, Toby?
I think that at the times I've seen it, because it is, you do want to make him a good dad, even if to show how he treats Ophelia differently to Laertes. You feel a lot of love with the father sending his son off on his first, gap year, or whatever he's doing. But I think that if you play all his bits of advice as completely heartfelt truisms, it gets to be a bit of a tedious long list. If you play all of them as, this is a doddery old fool, and all of them as sort of a gag, and have Laertes and Ophelia snickering behind his back, come on, Dad, you're going on, and all of those bits, it also gets its own kind of tedium. It's somewhere between the two. It's somewhere between art and artifice, where some of them land, and even a bit of a teary dad going, just be okay, don't spend your money, and other bits where he's going, and make sure your clothes are good, and everyone's going, all right, Dad, that's enough advice. It's got to be a bit of both, I think, for it to work.
Any other questions, friends? Yeah.
There was discussion about Hamlet being a hero or not being a hero, but is there a possibility that he could be an anti-hero in the same way that, Batman is? Because he's not done anything directly wrong, but he's not entirely innocent either.
Perfect, yes. Anti-hero, I think that's a great way of thinking about him. Han Solo. He's cool.
Yeah. And also tricky, yeah.
I think that's right, but unlike, I think what's interesting about Hamlet is I don't think he intends to be the lead. I think he's found himself in a story that he doesn't want to be in. And Shakespeare's very good at that, at taking characters and placing them in situations that force them to be out of character. And I think we see Hamlet completely off-centre all the time, and we get glimpses of what maybe he was like before, but really he's in such distress from the moment we meet him, and I don't think he intends to be the lead in the most famous play ever written. I think that's why the tension's so interesting.
Next question, please. Any other? Down the front here, yeah.
Another one for Rachel. I'm a high school teacher, and I guess I'm wondering broadly, and maybe for the whole panel, what are the things that you find hook kids, and just generally speaking, how do you find ways in?
Like I said, the languages, I just didn't expect it when I went, the way that kids would just hang spellbound on you when you start saying the words.
And there's a lot of it in the book as well.
Yeah,
there's a lot of Shakespeare in the book.
That was one of the things I tried to do, because you'd be familiar with it. Is it my daughters brought home from school the versions that they were reading, and they'd simplified all the language, and I was horrified. It's like, the language is the thing, the No Fear Shakespeare. So I'm all for making it accessible, but I had this whole idea that if you novelise it and you make it into a dialogue between someone speaking more easy to understand English, but keep all the beautiful bits as close as possible, because I wanted kids to have, the exact words in their head, not the simplified version. So that's what I was going for. But there is a really fun scene in the middle of the book, because she pulls him out, because she doesn't like violence. Like, she hasn't seen the play, so she pulls Hamlet out. It's like, you can't just go around killing people. So after he kills Polonius, she's like, that's it, we got to put a stop to this. So she takes him with her back to modern world, and he's just in her world, and she takes him to her English class where they're studying Hamlet. And everyone loves that scene, because she says, just be quiet. And they're like, okay. And then the kids start whinging about Hamlet and how it's so boring and he won't make up his mind. And then they say, and he's rude to his mother. And then they say that Ophelia's a tart, and he just loses it. And he's like, he's going to start stabbing people in the classroom. And he's telling all the kids off for being wastrels, and, telling the teacher off for not teaching them basic vocabulary. And everyone loves that scene where everyone's telling everybody off and the kids are laughing at him. Yeah, you totally have to. That's the best bit the kids love the most.
Great. I think there was another question up the back there, was there? Yes, there we go, up the back.
Hi, mine is actually not a question, more of a comment. I'm from Pakistan, and I studied my English literature there. And I was at the convent, and then I did my A-levels. I was one of the first girls in Pakistan to do A-levels privately. And the first book on the syllabus was Hamlet. And I had taken permission from the leading boys' school to study with their teachers part-time, and then appear for the exam through the British Council. And Hamlet was the first book we did. And we have amazing faculty in Pakistan as vis-a-vis English literature at the universities and in the schools. And I had this amazing teacher who taught me how to write, actually. And we studied Hamlet. And the first day I walked into his house, which is where the class was going to be, he had a pile of books for me. Internet was not readily available. I'm talking about the late 80s. And he gave me a pile of books, and he said, Amina, you're going to go read these books and come back next week. And we're going to discuss the book. And I looked at the pile, and I was like, what is this? And he goes, there are about 52 books written on them. I'm only giving you about 8. And so I went back, and I skimmed through them, came back, and had this wonderful discussion. And later, when I went to do my master's at one of the leading girls' university, I did the same thing and with an amazing teacher. So 2 years ago, my daughter works for Belvoir, and she's the producer there. And so she said, Mum, I know what you're going to love. And she got me tickets for Hamlet. And I was there and I saw you guys. And what happened was that we were there, and I had with me my cousin, who was a legend in school and has been the academic director for one of the foremost education systems. And she has moved to Australia. And she's retired now, and she and I went there. And as you said, we were singing along. I didn't remember all of my Hamlet after so many years, but I remembered a lot. And what I remember particularly was to be and not to be or not to be. And the way Harriet was put on the stage, it was like electric, absolutely electric. And so my cousin came out and said, what amazing actors. And I went, amazing actors, but amazing artistic director. And why I said that was because in Belvoir, Eamon, if anybody knows him, the artistic director allowed me to sit through some rehearsals. And I was in the rehearsals, and I thought, I wish they taught me Hamlet like this. It was actually a class in literary criticism. And the way that the characters were talking and the way they were talking about breaking down, as you said, bit by bit, it was just absolutely amazing. So thank you. I've seen Hamlet a lot of times. My father was crazy about theatre, seen a lot of theatre, but that was one of the best productions. And the 10 questions that the teacher had given me the first day, actually, those 10 questions were in my mind as I was viewing that Hamlet, and you actually kept all those mysteries there. So it was absolutely wonderful, and that's all I want to say, and that's why I'm here today, because I looked up and I said, Bell Shakespeare, I'm going. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would
That
you
is,
consider
that's wonderful,
doing
thank
like
you.
a sing-along Hamlet, like they do with Sound of Music? It could be something.
Yes, please, at the back there. Thank you.
I have a question for Peter. Peter, you mentioned the Greco-Roman tragedy being a story or a narrative between good versus good, and good versus evil being potentially a melodrama. And then you started to expand on Olivia's portrayal of this. I was just wondering if you could expand on that. Olivia's view, because he's probably one of the most famous exponents of Hamlet, versus how you approach Hamlet in your productions.
I would never criticise the performance. I think he was also committed to making the plays as accessible as possible. And I think for him in 1948, that might have seemed like a way of explaining the play. But for me, it's done quite a lot of damage because people see that or feel that Hamlet is mucking around, and I don't think he is. I think that the play's actually full of action, and that there is a serious dilemma that he's going through. But again, because the play's quite weird, it does mean that suddenly we go on these digressions. But my experience of the play, watching it, is never, why is everyone just wandering around and not getting to the point? That's not my experience of the play. So I think that I think he's struggling, but I don't think it's because I don't think it's as simple as he can't make up his mind. I think that undermines the difficult dilemma that he's got going, and Shakespeare goes out of his way to put the classical, because he's a Renaissance writer, and we sometimes miss it in Shakespeare. He places the classical tradition next to the Christian, almost scene by scene, and so the play A King, if you remember, is doing a piece from the Trojan War, and it's about a character who has no hesitation and killing, and Hamlet loves that speech, and in fact, Rogue and Peasant Slave comes out of the character being emotionally connected to the material, but it's no mistake that it's also the material is about a character who Hamlet can't be. That he, as a Christian, he can't be that person, which I just think is endlessly fascinating. Again, I think for a modern audience, this is kind of subconscious, a lot of this stuff, but it's definitely there.
I'd like to say as well that I think that Olivier was a great raconteur and a very talented actor, and was always on the lookout to how to make movies and make it more accessible. But he also loved the sound of his own voice, and he gave great interviews that go for pages and pages with Kenneth Tynan or on TV, and he'd be entertaining, and he gave what we'd call great sound bites. Sometimes they don't all add up. He can be quite contradictory at the end of an interview like he was at the beginning, and I think Hamlet is just a guy who talks to himself. He's a good, neat gag. You know what I mean? I'm not sure if he actually believed that in his soul, really, but it's a nice, fun thing to say if you're, in an interview smoking with Kenneth Tynan, whatever. Yeah.
Time for one last question over here, just on the side, if we could, just over here. Yep, Mike's coming down towards you.
Peter, please. I wondered, you talked a bit about the quartos and the folio. When you produce it, do you favour the second quarto or the folio, or do you make your mind up on a line-by-line or speech-by-speech basis what you think is going to work best for you?
Exactly. It's both of them. And it's line by line and word by word. And because we have to cut it, and I do it with James. James is the dramaturg on the texts. What we think our brief is, as opposed to Toby's brilliant production they did, I could categorise as a production that was really for people who knew the play. And the brilliance of it was that it was in conversation with the play. At Bell Shakespeare, carrying on John's tradition, we're really trying to cater for people who know the play very well and people who have never seen the play. And so we feel our responsibility is to give you as much of the play as possible. And so when we edit, we trim rather than cutting whole chunks out. Now our recent production, we did take Fortinbras completely out. And I apologise to the people who loved that bit of the story, but we felt that we wanted to excise that, and we wanted to finish when Hamlet finishes, which is to do with the politics, really. There's so many different things going on in the play. We took out that kind of outer politics, and so we trim within each speech and each dialogue and each scene all the way through. But we're cutting 10,000 words. It was 10,000 we took out? We ended up with 20,000 words, and it's 32 or 34,000 words in Hamlet. So it's a lot of words have to go, but every scene is in, except All Occasions and Fortinbras.
Ronaldo.
And Ronaldo was there for 2 previews. If you came to the first 2 previews, Ronaldo was in. And then Polonius, the actor playing Polonius with Ronaldo, had an instinct that it was taking us in the wrong direction. It was fascinating. And I was committed to that scene. It's an amazing scene, but it really shows Polonius as a political operator. And I was really interested in that because he is a fool, but he's also a very serious politician, and he's in a dilemma himself. And I was really keen on pushing that idea that he's in a difficult position and he's a political operator, and he's trying to make this new king's path smooth because they're potentially at war. Like there's some serious. It is a history play as well as being a tragedy. And so we wanted all that, but it took Polonius down and we couldn't get the play back. So we took it out on preview 3, and it was much better. It was really fascinating. So we were very sad to lose the scene, but the play was better without it. It's so interesting.
Ronaldo's the spy.
Yeah.
Right. The dad sends to go spy on Laertes. It's a whole new thing. I once read a crit of a very young Alec Guinness. I think he may even made his West End debut as a Ronaldo. And the crit said, steals the entire show as Ronaldo. And it didn't explain how. And I've always just wondered, what did he do with this one scene guy? that totally ripped the limelight away from the whole production.
I know he's great. In the Branagh 4-hour one, it's Gerard Depardieu plays Ronaldo. It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of our evening, friends. I just want to thank one more time Peter, Lucy, Toby and Rachel. Thank you all for being here.